Digital Dissection, a nerd podcast, can at times contain adult language and themes. It is not intended for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to the Digital Dissection podcast, where we take a closer and possibly unnecessary look at our favorite properties, creators, and topics. We are your humble hosts, Joe and Mark, two pop culture nerds dedicated to telling entertainment history before it's forgotten too soon. Join us on Facebook, Twitter, and our blog for more information on the show. We also love to hear from you, so why not write us at digitaldissectionpodcast@gmail.com. And now that we've got that out of the way, let's get to dissecting. So, Mark, what do you remember Batman being like in any production before he had rubber nipples?
I can remember distinctly him get nuts. You want to get nuts? Get nuts.
Nuts.
I fondly remember that part.
Oh yeah, great little scene there. Which if you are familiar with that scene, very shortly after the offer to get nuts, Bruce Wayne gets taken out pretty quickly. But I mean, all part of the ruse of being Bruce Wayne. But what we're looking at today, I'm glad that you bring that up, because that is pre-rubber nipples in the Keaton movies. He just was flat muscle chested. No need to make it think like, oh, this is just skin tight rubber on him. This is actually like some sort of protective material.
Yes.
But before that, the Batman we had, the like in the more public eye that wasn't in paper, which not a lot of people. I mean, enough people read comic books, but what most people had exposure to more than that was either going to be what we saw from the Adam West serials that were on TV, or from Super Friends. And do you recall how Batman was portrayed in either of those?
You know, it's not really coming to me. I know this is before a lot of the narratives were driven towards I work alone, where Batman is like continually the dude that's like lone wolfing it all the time,
Yep.
It was for me, this was an era where I was always familiar with Batman because he was marketed a ton, especially with movies.
Yep.
And the animated series, of course, which we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, it's the topic of today's podcast.
Yes.
Yeah. So, if you're not too familiar, if you're in Mark's shoes, you're not too familiar with Batman pre the '89 movie. He was basically this kind of goofy, zany detective, really. What you saw, because you'd have like Adam West. Adam West Batman was like this very, very comic representation. When I say comic, it is both comedic, like stand-up comic, and also comic book, because he and Robin would punch villains and you get these big pow graphics popping up on the screen. All of his detective work was basically these goofy riddles that he had to solve, and then he would think of them right away, or he'd let Robin guess and then correct him when Robin got it wrong, and then they would save the day. And when you looked at it, like the show would do these weird things where they were like very life or death situations where Batman is somehow strapped to this contraption, he's about to get sawed in half or something, and he narrowly makes an escape. And then other times he's singing to Robin, like good night or something. And it was just off the wall, goofy, and with some action. And
well, a lot of people have seen the above the head bomb carrying.
Oh, yes, from the movie.
Yeah, which for those of you who are listening to the audio only program, it was absolutely ridiculous how Adam West held this bomb over his head. Like he's physically holding it like almost like a kettlebell with both hands over the top of his head and running around with it. And
Yep.
It's iconic for how ridiculous it
It
was.
is, and he
You
was
know.
trying to find places to throw the bomb safely so it wouldn't get people hurt. And at every turn, he thought he'd have something like he's going to throw it into the water, but then there was a small family of ducks, so he couldn't throw it
Yes,
there. He had to run
of
away and do
course.
something different. Uh,
Yes.
this is also where we get like the overuse of bat in front of something because there always like batarangs in the
Yes.
Batmobile; those are always there. But then that
Yes.
movie gave us bat shark repellent.
Yes.
That had to be there.
Exactly.
The bat radar,
Joe,
everything. The bat
what
computer.
have I always said separates the good superheroes from the bad ones?
Marketing.
Brand recognition.
Yep.
Exactly. Exactly what it is. So get your name out there, make some products, throw the bat in front of it. But speaking of products, Joe,
hmm
in line with what we've talked about with some of the other TV properties, okay, before we get
hmm
into the Batman animated series, and this is where we would have the rotating, bat graphic and the we're going to go back to 1992.
Ooh.
If you guys want to jump into the vortex with us and get on back to the early 90s,
Yep. Get your
where
Jinkos ready, your round sunglasses, and your flannel, because we're doing this.
hey, oddly enough, just like what we did with Extreme Ghostbusters, we're going to go
hmm
take a quick look at the world of 1992 to get the palate cleansed,
hmm
Let's set back up for what 1992 was like. Now, there were a couple products that came out this year that I wanted to put a little bit of focus on for today because Joe, some of them are actually probably a little more familiar than even you realize. Now, do you remember a product called Boss Coffee?
I remember seeing it, but I'm not a coffee drinker today, and I definitely was not in 1992.
Oh, dude, it was a Japanese coffee that came out
hmm
that people were kind of losing their minds over because Japan was still foreign and scary to us back then.
Yes.
Which once again, this is not me trying to make commentary. It's more just
hmm
people were weird. The world was still pretty small, but the reason why I want to bring up Boss Coffee was very specific because of Tommy Lee Jones. Oddly enough,
hmm
our our Two Face and Batman Forever. Is it
Yes.
Batman Forever? Yes,
Yeah, Batman Forever, because at
yeah,
that point in time, Billy D. Williams was thought to be
that's
too
right.
old to continue being Harvey Dent.
That's right. Yeah, well, okay. The reason why Boss Coffee is kind of on the map, it's not because of the release in 1992. It's actually because since 2006, Tommy Lee Jones has been the spokesperson for these commercials
Ah.
exclusively in Japan. So if you ever want to take a look at these, absolutely ridiculous as most Japanese commercials tend to be.
hmm
And it's got Tommy Lee Jones, who is one of the most one of the most self-serious, holds himself in a different regard,
hmm
it's just it's so strange. It doesn't make any sense. So yeah, Boss Coffee premiered
hmm
1992.
All right. Interesting. I'm guessing
Yeah.
this is like the earliest version of someone drinking the Boss coffee, really liking it, and being like, "Friend, you've introduced me to this coffee. Is this drugs?" And like,
Yeah.
no, it's even better than that. It's
Yeah.
from Japan, and
Yeah.
that's what we got with Boss coffee, but it was really old at the time.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Well,
hmm
this was an interesting year for a lot of these products. Okay, there's a couple more I'm going to throw out here.
hmm
The Cliff Bar premiered in 1992.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I thought it's been around a lot longer
I
than
did
that, but
too. I
yeah,
was thinking at least the 80s.
yeah, yeah. And this is another one that some people
hmm
think happened in the 80s. Crystal Pepsi premiered in
Ah,
1992.
yes, Crystal Pepsi.
Yeah, yeah.
hmm
Like Joe, when you're sitting there drinking a Pepsi as a kid, I wanted to know what the marketing folks were thinking. Where it's like, what could we do to make Pepsi better? And it's like, make it invisible.
Yes. Everyone loves invisible things. This is perfect.
Yeah. What is it? Is it water? Is it Pepsi? I don't know.
I don't know. There's bubbles in
Yeah.
it, but it could be sparkling water.
Yeah. Exactly.
Is this
Exactly.
Perrier? What's going on here?
Yep. Yeah. Crystal Pepsi made its debut. And then also, this was a brand of clothing that a lot of folks may recognize from
hmm
back in the day called FUBU.
Oh,
And
yes. For us, by us.
yes, exactly. Very popular, of course, because it was obviously made, created, and targeted towards the African American market.
hmm
Every now and again, those lanky white boys would go find some of it, and everyone would go, "Dude, that's not for you. Please, please don't wear that."
Mm-mm.
And and FUBU, I actually don't even remember if FUBU is still making products to this day, but I know they were for quite some
hmm
time.
I'm not gonna put it past it, considering I also found out I think much earlier this year that Jinko was still making jeans, and they are still expensive for some reason. So
Yeah.
yeah, Fubu could
Yeah.
still very well
Yeah.
be going.
Honestly, I give Fubu a little bit more credit because rather than make like parachute pants into jeans,
Hmm.
Fubu is basically making their own styles of like football jerseys and
Hmm.
sporting apparel. And so, as much as I thought like I can't pull off wearing Fubu, I did always kind of tip my hat to them that it was actually
Hmm.
cool looking stuff for
Oh
an
yeah.
original product line. So
Hmm.
I always gave them a lot of credit. But yeah, that debuted in 1992, Joe.
All right, which
Yeah.
I believe is the same year we get Batman the animated series.
Oh, it totally is.
Oh
That's why
yeah.
we're going through 1992. There's there's
Hmm.
there's actually a couple more things we'll do quick
Hmm.
fire here.
Okay.
Popcorn Chicken debuted in 1992,
Hmm.
and as well as the Super Nintendo Entertainment System.
Oh yeah, the SNES.
Yep, and a couple more. We've got the Talk Boy
Oh
from the
yeah,
Home
Homo
series.
2. Hmm.
Yep. And we talked about the TI calculator. Well, this was the year that we specifically got the TI 85.
Yep.
So quite a banner year, Joe. A lot
Yep.
happening.
That's the Chinese fireball of the calculator world right there. Just a, yeah.
Yep, yep. And rounding
Hmm.
us out, we've got gasoline at $1.13 a gallon,
Oof. Oh, that
and
that stings.
yeah, little,
Hmm.
just a tiny little bit different now.
Yep.
So
I mean, I even remember when gas went over $1 for like the first time. My parents being really mad about it.
yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Oh
the
yeah,
world we live in today.
your dad was already building the doomsday bunker. He was ahead of the curve.
Well,
Yeah,
all
dude.
right. Now that we now have 1992 here in the states for us, we're gonna bring it back to Batman and how he gets reinvented just a few years earlier, because like we had said, pre 1992, pre 80s, we really had Batman as this kind of this goofy detective. And he got that way because even originally he was almost like too dark for kids.
Mhm.
I mean, it was the point where Batman was actually, believe it or not, despite him having his one rule, now he was totally fine with shooting dudes when he was originally made up in the 30s into the 40s.
Yeah.
He actually carried a gun with him regularly. But they moved away from that. They softened his image. And then that softer image that we got used to. And then we got the success of Superman the movie in the 70s.
Hmm.
And they were immediately like, well, Warner Brothers like, well, we got to be able to do this again with another character. And Batman was the first one that came to mind for making a movie. And they brought on Tim Burton to be the director of this. Now, before this, he had, I think, what, animated stuff.
Yep.
He didn't have a whole lot to his name yet. So bringing on Tim Burton immediately had like fans like, whoa, hold on, pump the brakes. We can't have Batman being brought in by Tim Burton. He's gonna make this into some weird like goofy animation thing. And to make
Hmm.
things even worse for the fans at this time is when they announced Michael Keaton as the lead
Yeah.
actor to be Bruce Wayne and Batman. And if looking at this, from today's standpoint, in retrospective, like, well, Michael Keaton did a great job. He did fine. But before that, he was a comedic actor. And they're like, well,
Yeah.
fuck, we're just going to get we're going to get another Batman the movie from the 60s. And this is what
Mhm.
this is going to be again. It's going to be zany. It's going to be awful. But Tim Burton basically knew right away, like, we can't do Batman like that. Otherwise, this is going to be a laughing stock. It's kind of like, he's like, we've got to do two things. One, we've got to do this like they did with Superman in the first movie. We've got to make it so it's something that adults want to come and see. We can't make this for the kids, otherwise it's going to flop. It's going to be bad. And
Yeah.
number two, to make this work and to actually make it to be something that the adults are going to like and listen to and take seriously, we can't make the movie about Batman. We have to make it about Bruce Wayne. And they focus it around how you had this larger backdrop and this darker past and how that shapes him and forms him into being the person he is and why he dresses up like a giant bat and goes out and beats up villains on rooftops at nights. And it made the story better. Like they took the kind of the shift in how Batman was even being told in the comics at that time, because before that, again, like, you had the horror that was done to comic books in like the basically the 60s, where you had massive lawsuits against the industry saying that like They were promoting all this horrible ideology, and the industry was forced to really soften the tone on a lot of the
Hmm.
characters. And that's where we get like Robin, and Batman is like this softer detective as opposed to like this, you know, guy who's going around shooting people on rooftops. But in the
Yeah.
80s, like that stuff relaxes a little bit, and we start get these darker Batman stories like Batman Year One, The Dark Knight Returns, and The Killing Joke. Which, if you've
Mhm.
read any of those, you know this is some pretty dark Batman. I think
Yes.
one of my favorite Batman lines ever comes out of The Dark Knight Returns when he's fighting this mutant in a junkyard, and this mutant had previously like kicked Batman's ass, and he comes back to form a little bit and wins, and the mutant makes some sort of line, and Batman's like, "You made one mistake tonight, and one mistake was thinking that this was a junkyard, but really it's an operating table." And he snaps the guy's leg in half, and it was dark, it was brooding, it was fantastic Batman. So after like these stories, you've got like the movie industry being like, this is how we have to tell Batman now. Maybe not like that dark. We don't have to have him breaking people's limbs on camera, but we can't have him like running around with a bomb over his head with bat shark repellent and telling bad and solving cheesy riddles to save the day. And
Yeah.
if you're familiar with Batman 89, huge hit, like monumental success. It spawned what, three more movies after that, and then after Batman Robin had to take a break for a bit, and it really is what helped make telling Batman stories in the mainstream media more possible. If 89 flopped, we wouldn't have really most of the Batman stuff we have today. We definitely wouldn't have Batman the animated series.
Yeah. Yeah. Which,
Mm-hmm.
that's why the animated series, I think, it was so easy to be able to notice the difference, and not just Batman narratives, but the difference in how serious they took
Mm-hmm.
this adaptation, compared to even other cartoons at the time. Because in 92, like the other stuff that was on TV at that point for kids,
Mm-hmm.
was like the original X-Men series had come out.
Yep.
We've got the Adams Family.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, geez, like it wasn't it wasn't like we were inundated with comic book properties. We had a few,
Mm-mm.
but like the rest of the notables were like Goof Troop and
Yeah.
Conan the Adventurer.
Mm-hmm.
Like the tone of these shows wasn't close.
Yeah.
X-Men was a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
right, but even then, it was still erring on the side of corniness
Oh
versus,
yeah.
yeah, versus being almost more of an adult tone, but
Mm-hmm.
directed at children.
Well, yeah. Well, let's look at why that had to be for the most part, though, because you have basically standards and practices and all these rules that are set across what's considered child programming. When Batman, even before Batman aired, you had the major three networks, and they had basically specific government guidelines saying that like you need to have so many hours of programming meant for children each day.
Mhm.
And this included, of course, like cartoons. So this greatly dictated lots of things and lots of rules that these cartoons had to follow. Like one, children must always be seen being safe at all times. So even if like a child gets kidnapped, they're never really in any mortal danger. There's never like a gun pointed to them. There's never a knife at their throat. There's never anything like that. And even there will be like other small things. If you see a child getting into a car, they have to animate the child getting a seatbelt put on. That was a specific rule. Like you had to do these things. Children have to use non-replicable weapons in TV shows, meaning it was okay for them to use like a ray gun or a laser blaster or something that's an unrealistic weapon, but they literally can't like defend themselves like a frying pan because realistically, a kid could go grab a frying pan and smack someone on the
Yeah.
side of the head. So
Yep.
these were specific rules. Now, when we look at Batman animated before this, we basically had Super Friends, and that was his animated anything. So Super Friends had a lot of even more specific rules on them, meaning that in many cases, like you couldn't have weapons, even where weapons would seem realistic, like with police officers and like people in military. They never had weapons on them in the show because their censorship wouldn't allow for it. This was a show made by Hanna Barbera, and that was a Hanna Barbera specific. We don't see guns in these things,
Yeah.
and
We
I
see walkie-talkies used nefariously.
oh, all the time with walkie talkies and screaming and demands. I mean, other things like even like the heroes weren't allowed to punch things in Super Friends. Like,
Yeah.
could you imagine like Superman? Like one thing, like Superman literally did this thing where he lifted up a wall and the villain ran into it, and they almost considered having to edit that to be different because of what happened to the villains. And
So you got to think of this too, though.
mm-hmm,
There were a lot of kids named Kyle out there who weren't drinking Monster Energy yet, and they
no,
were trying to hold off the destruction of drywall by their
I would
little
say
hands.
the drywall industry was basically dying at that time because it was lasting so well. It was so strong and reliable. They're like, we're not selling enough of this stuff.
This is, and then suddenly the name
Hmm.
Kyle like dominates children's names, boys'
Hmm.
names for the next like 10 years, and the rest is history.
Rest is
Yeah.
history. Speaking of
Yeah.
names, if you're familiar with the character Darkseid from the DC comics, he was brought in the last season of Super Friends,
Yeah.
and they
Too scary.
literally, yeah, they almost changed his name because Darkseid was almost too scary of a name.
Yeah.
And at that point in time, after that, you had a big name in the animation industry. Are you familiar with Jean MacCurdy at all, Mark?
Jean MacCurdy. The
Mm-hmm.
name, I've seen the name and a credit, but I don't have Jean MacCurdy committed to memory though.
She was I believe she was on the writing team and part of the production team for Super Friends and a lot of other Hanna-Barbera stuff. And after like this season of Super Friends, she's like, "Fuck this shit, I'm out. I can't do this anymore.
Mm,
This crap is corny. It's awful to write. It's awful to produce, and it's just bad storytelling. It's bad TV, and I'm not gonna have any part of it anymore." So she boogies on out, and goes to Warner Brothers. Um, and that's really where this whole thing starts is Jean MacCurdy making it to Warner Brothers because she gets there and at the time the Warner Brothers animation department is relatively small. There's not a lot going on there. It's basically you've got like Looney Tunes, Merry Melodies, and they bring that back every once in a while, and those are their big things. Well, something also really big happens in the 90s. A little man, may have heard of him by the name of Steven Spielberg.
mm. Yeah,
I know,
it's not ringing a bell.
indie guy. For some reason, Warner Brothers is in love with him. They're like, this guy gets whatever the hell he wants. We're gonna do anything to make Steven Spielberg happy. We don't care, honestly, if we sink too much money into a property and it flops. If it made Spielberg happy, it was good enough for us. That was literally the attitude behind it. And so Gene MacCurdy gets a new idea thrown at her. Like, we're gonna make a show called Tiny Toons, and it's literally gonna be like mini versions of the Looney Tunes, but they're not the same characters. They're new characters, but we get different sort of things. We've got mini like bunnies, we've got like ducks, new pigs, new Tasmanian devils, all sorts of things. And they decided they're going to do as much as they can and that they have like enough like adult humor in that where like it goes over the children's heads, but like the
Yeah.
adults can even
And
like, "Oh, that's funny. I understand that. That's pretty great." The animation was high quality. The stories were like the like little 15-minute shorts, so you get 2 episodes in a half hour, and it was pretty great. So, and by pretty great, like it was actually a hit for Warner Brothers. It did really well. So, after Gene MacCurdy's success with Tiny Toons, she gets this idea or this basic opportunity. We're like, you know what? Let's really expand the animation department. What else can we go into? Superheroes are an untapped thing right now because we haven't done anything with them in a while. Who should we go with for that? And she was thinking, how about Batman? And they're like, great, let's make a Batman cartoon. You're in charge of it. Go for it. So, because of the success of Tiny Toons and how well that went, she gets to get this Batman production off the gets the ball rolling for it.
yeah.
And one thing she had in mind right away is like, okay, if we're going superheroes, we are not going back to Super Friends. If we do that, this whole thing's lost. It's gone again. We've lost it. We've got to do something more of like what we did with Batman '89. It was a great movie. It was a little darker. It had a more serious tone, and we have to find a way to bring that to TV. And
Mm.
another way she thought a way to do it is actually like, how about we actually go back even further? And we go to the '40s, and we go with Max Fleischer. Are you familiar with Max Fleischer?
No, no, I'm learning a lot right now though.
Fantastic. I'm happy to teach. It's what I do. If you remember really old Superman shorts and serials that were animated, they had a
Yeah. Oh, yes.
they had a
Yes.
darker tone to them, and by darker tone, it just wasn't super bright and happy everywhere.
Yes.
If there was a joke, it literally came in at the last second, as like Clark Kent would say something to Lois Lane as the episode. is taken
Yes.
care of. But they're 15-minute shorts. They're action packed. It's got this kind of, I mean, by kind of like, it was definitely a darker, like 1940s, like almost like cop drama sort of like feel to them with what
Yeah.
Superman was doing. He struggled, he persevered, he, punched out guys when they needed it. And she's like, we need to do that. So she brings on um, two very important names. One specifically gets associated with Warner Bros. Animation to this day, and that's Bruce Timm. Yes, you remember Bruce Timm. Good.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I am nodding my head. So if once again, this is the difference between audio and video
hmm
programs here. Yes, I
Yep.
am nodding my head to Joe, and Joe is staring at me like the nodding is yes, yes, it is.
Yes. hmm
Nodding equals yes, yes, sir.
So yeah, Bruce Timm, like this is a guy whose his work is influenced, basically almost how everything's drawn in Warner Brothers animation. If you remember the very successful Justice League and Justice League Unlimited shows,
Yes.
and even like every Batman animated series, like Batman Beyond, and then Superman the animated series, all of that is Bruce Timm's style. Even if he's not directly animating for it anymore, they're like, nope, we've got to do what Bruce Timm did.
Hmm.
So we get Bruce Timm, then Eric Radomski, who were also had worked on Tiny Toons with Jean MacCurdy, but she's the one who went to these two and like, okay, we're gonna make Batman, and I want something that's Max Fleischer, but not Max Fleischer if you get my drift. And they're like, so we get to do like something more like noir and not goofy, and she's like, that's exactly what we want. And they're like, and we can do that now because last we were told the government has told us no on this. And she's like, just do it, we'll figure it out, don't worry about it. And they're like, all right, great. So basically this is the first key that made this cartoon a success is you had animators, writers, and production. They're basically like, we're going to make this great. We're going to make this into something that is not only enjoyable for like anyone who likes Batman to watch, but if like someone were to watch this and they were to see the story or and they were to see what's going on, one, they're going to love visually what's going on, and two, we're going to do our best to tell stories that are interesting to not only kids but older audiences as well, and especially that older audience part. They're thinking the demographic we want is going to be like pre-teen to teen. That's what we those are that's the audience we want to have for this show. So it's that idea that we're going to have this staff working on it. And when we look at the staff itself, when we expand a little bit on it even further, what was really rare to happen is when they were making this show, the writers and the animators were all on the same floor as each other. Not just the same building,
Hmm.
but the same
Yeah.
floor of the building as each other. So that when the animator was working on something that was a part of the story, they could literally like walk 4 cubicles down and be like, hey, you wrote this down. I'm trying to draw it. I'm not sure what's going on. Can you tell me what you're thinking? And they could
Yeah.
actually work through things very, very well.
Yeah, which for folks that haven't seen this,
Mm-hmm.
which I mean, if you're listening to this program, you're likely a nerd or maybe related to Joe or myself. Either way, 30 years later, that collaboration between teams is one of the easiest things that you could tell about this show
Mm-hmm.
because there's other animation at the same time that came out that we're even fans of that went through some really strange things because they would either outsource the animation to a
Yep.
completely different studio in a different country.
Mm-hmm.
And due to how animation works and how long it takes to get ideas to television, there's a lot of time in between writing something, animating it, and
Mm-hmm.
syncing it up and ready to go. So this is a very important thing to note here because it's a show that's almost produced as well as a movie, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
For an
Mm-hmm.
animated show, and like you mentioned, it starts as early as the title screen.
Mm-hmm.
The
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 actual title
intro.
cards. Oh,
Yeah,
gorgeous. Mm-hmm.
yeah, like just really strong,
Mm-hmm.
really like well made art. So that's the first thing I noticed watching this TV show is that yeah, I've seen some good animation
Mm-hmm.
before, but not a concept like this executed this well.
Yeah.
Like you just didn't see it.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I love that you bring up that you said it felt like watching a movie each week because actually, that's something that Bruce and Eric actually said right off the bat. Like, when we make this, we're gonna make it so it feels like you're watching a mini movie every week instead of a TV show. That's
Yeah.
one of the main goals we have here. Other than like, it's gonna be serious, it's gonna be noir, mini movie every week. So that's the production quality and the storytelling quality that we want.
Hmm.
And we focus more on that animation because you're talking about how that quality can instantly kill you. Like I mean, even like things you love are gonna have bad episodes where the animation just
Sure.
isn't quite there. There are episodes of Transformers where like I love, and then you've got like Soundwave looking over here, and then he turns, but for some reason the mouth mask stays put.
Yeah, yeah,
That's weird. Even
yeah.
like newer things, like honestly, like even Dragon Ball Z, which is we've talked about in the show, we've had Kale Bear on, and a lot of people love. Like you can tell, like some episodes are just, and others are like, huh, this is gonna be the episode where we stare a lot or have a lot of fast-paced action, and the animation is just kind of, it's okay,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
okay, it's there. They did a job today,
yeah,
but when it comes to animating, this is where you get Bruce Timm really, really coming into his own because this is a time where he is thinking like, all right, we're moving on to a serious cartoon. There's going to be a lot of action. So when I make these characters and when I design Batman, because he's the one who, when they started like pitching this more and more over like what they want the show to look like to executives, he's like, we have to have a Batman who can look serious but also be animated for action well. This meant that if I draw him like I would in he's depicted like I would draw him like he's depicted in the comics, like very big, muscular. We see every ab, we see every like bicep, we see all the things. Like no one's gonna want to animate that shit. That's way too hard.
yeah,
So Bruce Timm gets this basically almost like kind of like a Disney-esque quality of straights on curves. Like when you see like muscles,
yeah,
like
yeah,
you'll see like the
yeah.
bicep is there, but then the tricep is flat. Or you'll get like the pecs are there, but then the abs are flat. They're just straight drawn. And this is great because you get this beautifully muscular yet simplistic looking character design that has became very unique to Bruce Timm. And this would end up becoming basically the industry standard for decades after that. Even in like stuff that's not necessarily very Bruce Timm style, because when you say Bruce Timm style, they could typically see they have very broad shoulders and then
Yes.
they narrow down at the
Yeah,
waist quite a bit.
yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of have this like half moon orientation
Yeah.
from the shoulders to the waist,
Mm-hmm.
and you can see that hourglass, but like masculine hourglass, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
kind
Like it's
of.
yeah,
Like basically
yeah,
the top half of the hourglass, and we cut the bottom half off.
exactly,
That's what we get.
exactly. Yeah,
So like that becomes like big, and then the Justice League show like takes that to the next level a little bit.
yeah,
Even like the next iteration of Batman the animated series, when it moves from I think Fox to the WB, like they amp that up a little bit too. Uh,
yeah,
but yeah, so we get that, which makes him very easy to animate, but he looks very powerful at the same time. We make the grays on him darker. We swap the light blue out for black with these kind of like dark blue highlights for the costume
yeah, yeah, yeah. And
Mm-hmm.
it's okay. So here's something very specific that I want to point out. It's a show that really utilized the concept of light to dark, which is
Mm-hmm.
a very basic, art concept. And what they would typically do is that the form of Batman in this show would often not be presented with color first. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of times you see Batman as a dark figure, and then it's using lightning or some kind of like storm effect.
Yeah.
And so when Batman does come into the light, his effects really pop, even though they're very minimal.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're very minimalistic, but how it's presented to you though, it really uses the whole cow. And I know we say that a
Mm-hmm.
lot, but yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So it is a much different way
Mm-hmm.
to kind of bring him into the fold, but at the same time, we don't usually get in the Batman universe up to this point, like brooding Batman.
Mm-hmm.
Like Batman was meant to be feared by those that he, hunted, right?
Yeah.
Or went after and brought justice to. And it's like, yeah, Adam West would punch things and occasionally would say skeet on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
So much different. Like
Mm-hmm.
Batman actually brings consequence and he's something to be feared, which is the whole point of
Yeah.
the bat. So yeah, I think that was one of the really cool things
Mm-hmm.
that was unique in this time period. And yeah, like you said, it's still to this day influencing Batman.
Absolutely. And I mean, even like, I like that you bring up like kind of like the environment that Batman's into and how that's dramatically different because it was made very different. And we get this different Gotham that's not basically like this bright, shining metropolis, which is Metropolis, is what it's supposed to be. Um, but this is the first time like, I guess since Tim Burton now, the first time in the animated world that we get this kind of darker Gotham. We have the buildings are not these bright grays in the daytime anymore. We typically have like they're either dark gray or they're brown. We have a night sky that's this eerie red all the time instead of a
Yeah.
peaceful, like calm, like blue or something. And it
Yeah.
gets lit up by lightning on occasion, like you said, and that's usually how we see Batman if he when he first gets introduced. And then they also had this really great like Art Deco style
Yes.
for everything. All the buildings, the cars look like they were out of the 40s. Anything that's in the
Yes.
sky looks like how the 40s thought things would look in the future. So
Yeah.
the show did this great job of having this kind of classic, like classic yet worn down look, but with all the modern technology that we had in the 90s. So like you still had portable phones, or you like portable phones. You had car phones in
Yeah.
Batman,
Yeah.
which that hilarious like trend that did not go very long. But they had a very modern but classic look to it that was just so easy to fall in love with. It captured you right away because all these vehicles were like even the Batmobile was this incredibly sleek looking like
Yeah.
torpedo of a car, and everything else just looked like they were these kind of like these bubbly 40s vehicles, and it just stood out from everything else you were seeing at the time on TV.
Well, and this is where I think we have a good opportunity to kind of explain, or at least I wanted to explain in my own words what I thought Gotham was,
Mm-hmm.
because like you've mentioned in some of the film adaptations up to this point, which there are very few, of course, but the television adaptation, looking at the city of Gotham, and once again, we're talking about things that kind of trailblazed
Mm-hmm.
for the next 30 years, is that yeah, Gotham has this veneer to it, right? Like it's meant to look impressive. It's meant to look like it's classy. It's meant to look like it's a higher
Mm-hmm.
society of living, but we truly know that that's fake.
Yeah.
Like we truly know that that's not real.
Mm-hmm.
And you get to see that in this show. It's like, yeah, you're getting to see all these large buildings and you get to see the life that Bruce Wayne lives within it, which
Mm-hmm.
is, parties and meet talking to important people. And if you just looked at the visual of Gotham, you would think, yes, this looks like the pinnacle of humanity at this point
Mm-hmm.
in time. But no, it's not. That if you look at one frame, you would think something different. But if you look at the city as a whole,
Yeah.
it is a tremendous lie.
Mm-hmm.
It's like putting glitter on trash, basically.
Pretty much, because yeah, you can go like in different parts of Gotham. Like you said, you see these like these lavish buildings and these like rich lifestyles, but then you go a block away and there's a guy sleeping on the street and there's trash everywhere.
Yeah,
So they do this, and then really like they were real city like they how many big cities don't have that like in our country. There are so many cities where you see like where the money really is, and as soon as you
yeah,
leave that, you start to see how people are forced to live and adapt when they don't have the means to make a living.
yeah,
And this put that out front for everyone to see to show that this is the world that Batman lives in. So
yeah,
now that they have the idea this is where Batman lives, this is how Batman's going to look, they said, all right, it's time to put the trailer together. They put the trailer together, and it's basically this small like short of like a bank being robbed. They've got guns, they're firing back. The Batmobile flies into action. The robbers get away to a rooftop where Batman interferes with them. He punches them out, ties them up. The police show up and they're just tied up under a spotlight. And then Batman, you just see as a silhouette on the buildings, and then lightning flashes and he's lit up.
yeah,
And
yeah,
if that sounds familiar and iconic, it's because that trailer is what gets reanimated and turned into the theme song for the opening of the show. But when they made it, the idea that Tim and Eric had is like, okay, well, we're gonna make it. We'll put some voice to it. We don't have the budget for voices yet, so we are going to do the voices ourselves. And they basically add these grunts and these very simple voices. But before they could even do that, Jean
yeah,
MacCurdy saw it and loved it, took it to everyone else who's like, okay, we know this was an idea, but now like we've got to really get money behind this. She
yeah,
showed that to executives and even Mr. Spielberg, and they're like, fucking make this show, man. Like, just do
yeah,
it. Like, you have to make it. And that's where like funding really gets poured into Batman, the animated series.
yeah, yeah.
So Oh
I
no, go ahead.
I got to stop you for 1 second because I love the design of Batman.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but something that I always thought about the design of Bruce Wayne was that when I was growing up, I am a man with a long torso and shorter legs, and I feel like whoever designed Batman
Mm-hmm.
had to have lived a life like I once did. Because when you look at the design of Bruce Wayne, he has the whitest pants you've ever seen on a
Yes.
person, and it makes him look like a stump. Like he looks like a stump of a man, and he's supposed to be billionaire playboy, but he's dressed like I was dressed when I was 7 years
Mm-hmm.
old.
Yep. And
It's,
tan suits all day for
yeah,
Bruce Wayne in that show.
he was doing it long before Obama. So we've got
Mm-hmm.
tan suit, and it's seriously, if you look at this dude, look at his even the first few episodes, he's wearing this tan suit, and I swear to God, he could fit two people in those pairs of pants, like side by side.
But that was the 90s. We had baggy everything.
I know it was the 90s, but when you
Mm-hmm.
put Batman next to Bruce Wayne, it's like, are these different people? It's like this can't
Mm-hmm.
be the same guy. There's no way, unless he's like,
Mm-hmm.
stuffing his pants with pillows or something. Like
Yeah.
it doesn't make sense. Because it's not like you're I don't know. I don't, but it's like his waist as Batman is so tiny,
Mm-hmm.
yet when he's dressing as Bruce Wayne, his shoulders and his waist, they're aligned.
Yep, they're just one.
Like he is a man-sized cankle when
Mm-hmm.
he is Bruce Wayne,
And what's
right?
even more bizarre is, in the 90s, there were shoulder pads in those suits.
Oh, there totally
So
were.
that means that as bulky as you think those pants are, they're even puffier because they have to match the shoulder pads in that suit.
Oh yeah. Yeah, dude. I'm sorry. I couldn't go any longer without mentioning this. Like if you watch
Mm-hmm.
this and you look at them side by side, you're like, we talked about how people look at Clark Kent and they're like, oh yeah, that's not Superman.
Mm-mm.
If you looked at Batman and Bruce Wayne in this animated series, you're like, there ain't no
No way.
goddamn way.
No,
First, there's
no
no
way.
goddamn way.
First
No.
of all, Bruce Wayne's a bit of an idiot. He just blows his
Oh,
parents' money left and right. And now look at that. The man's a tree.
yeah. He seriously is. I'm expecting a hippie to be chained to him and preventing construction equipment from knocking him down.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's how big Bruce Wayne is
Oh
when you
yeah.
look at him here. Which you know what? Who knows? Like maybe that was just the way of disguising him even
Yes.
more than he
Mm-hmm.
already was, and that's fine. But I just, as a thick boy who has always been a thick boy, it's like Bruce Wayne. I feel
Mm-hmm.
seen. I feel seen. So,
Oh man. Okay, well, on top of like things that made the show great, the animation and obviously feeling seen with the thickness here, and having a staff that's on the same page and on the same floor as each other, one thing that definitely would have killed this show with all that great things happening is if the stories weren't what they were. And Bruce Timm
yeah.
was actually quoted saying is that my art or the art of this show is useless without story. So, like he said, this idea of making every episode like a mini movie every week. So he helped with some of the writing to it, but mostly it was on Jean MacCurdy to find people who are good at writing this and could do this. One person who she thought of right away was actually Alan Burnett, who she worked with on Super Friends, and he also quit because of how bad the stories were. He actually
Oh,
lamented on how like it got so bad at one point. He's like, anytime you're watching a show and you shrink the main people, and that's an episode, they're out of ideas for what they can do. And he talked about how like he had Robin fighting a tarantula, and Robin knocks the tarantula off the table, and
mhm.
the censor's like, you have to show that the spider's okay. He's like, are you fucking serious? Then to go back and animate that you could see the spiders walking away and they weren't hurt. So
they're,
he's
wa-
like,
they're walking away like talking shit.
that motherfucker in his
Yeah.
tiny shorts. Meh.
Yeah.
So he's like, I will do this if I can do what I want to, and that's tell noirs. And she's like, that's exactly what we're doing. He's like, seriously? Like, I didn't think we could do that. How can we do that? Well, here's a secret. Here's how they got around doing all those things that they found out they were saying they couldn't do. The punching thing, one Warner Brothers is like, fuck it, have him punch it. He's a superhero. He can do that. But like other things, like obviously like having like violence and guns going off, that was the thing that they figured out this is where they got creative to figure out how they went around. They basically always animated the gun there. They'd animate the gun firing. You could always see the impact or like the weight of what happened after it fired, but you'd never actually see the bullet hit anything.
Yes.
So you'd see the line leaving the gun. you'd like people would obviously like, oh, I've been hit, and you see the dramatic like throwback, and you see them going down. You may even see them dying, but you never see blood spattering out. You never see the bullet
No.
hit their body or anything. And that's basically how they got around all of that. Is like they had their own. Obviously, they have like someone working on staff. It's like, no, if you do this, like the government's going to say no. And basically, the person they had, and I feel horrible because I forget her name, who they had working on this, her mentality was basically like, what's the most we can get away with instead of just flat out saying no all the time. So when they'd write things down, she'd like change it to this instead, and this will work. And so that way, when she do that, it wouldn't be like change this to this instead, otherwise your show's not going to work. It'd be like change it to this, so that way you're still telling the same story, you're still getting a similar visual, but this is something that's now acceptable. And that was something that absolutely was pinnacle to saving the show and making it what it was.
Yeah.
So you get Alan Burnett, you get Mark Deeney, who is one of the bigger writers on the show and writes a lot of the bigger episodes that are here. And they go ahead and they start telling these stories. And what makes a good story for a hero? Well, it has to be their villains. If you have villains who are doing evil for the sake of being evil, Skeletor shall have his revenge, He-Man. It falls
Yeah.
apart. It just
Yeah.
does. And I mean, knock He-Man all you want. I mean, it worked for what it was, but even then, like, you get He-Man the movie, and that's probably what killed He-Man. But if you
Well, you
have,
yeah,
mm-hmm,
you do end up getting what is unique for a lot of animation, which
mm-hmm,
is a background and a history for almost every villain on this
mm-hmm,
show, for the exception of the Joker and the Penguin, I'm pretty sure.
yeah,
Like those are the only two that you don't get a fleshed out, like this is day zero to now.
yep,
Like everybody else has a motivation.
mm-hmm,
It's fully explained, it's fully realized. And so yeah, like that's why when I was watching this, I'm like, this kind of enforced what I think of villainy even
mm-hmm,
now. It's like, and what I appreciate about it, it's like if I can understand, and we've mentioned this idea before, if I can understand why someone's doing what they're doing, I don't care how stupid it is.
mm-hmm,
If I know the motivation behind it, I can at least not put myself in their shoes, but I can understand why they did what they did.
yes, mm-hmm.
And yeah,
There's no justification, there's understanding. And
yes,
that's what's going on here is because they knew that when they write these villains that they have to make them people. And
yeah,
they're people who in their minds or in their and even in their reality, they've been wronged by society, by someone specific. And what they're doing now in their mind is righting what was wrong, what was done wrong to them. Even if it's
yeah,
not done the right way, they're now doing something they shouldn't be doing, but they're doing it with a I take it back, not a justifiable reason, but they're doing it with reason. And
yeah,
that is what hooks you on every single character. Uh, More, I would say every single villain in this, even like kind of like odd ones like Tempest Fugit, who, like to my knowledge, like he's only there like I did like the only reason I even recognize the name is because it's on my parents' grandfather clock. I'm like they're making my grandfather clock into a villain, but they made
yeah,
it enjoyable. They would do that, and you would have these villains like in sometimes very realistic senses. Like you had like a an Olympian athlete who kind of lost his mind after he wasn't competing anymore and literally got to the point where he used his riches and wealth to make him where he thought he was actually Zeus and he was suffering from like some sort of bizarre mental illness. Um, and I think one of the best cases where we really see this with one of the more renowned Batman villains is Mr. Freeze in the episode Heart of Ice.
yes,
And this is, believe it or not, they made the backstory for Mr. Freeze. They
yeah,
made Nora Frost because before this, Mr. Freeze was just a weird guy with a ray that froze things, and that was Mr. Freeze and everything.
yeah,
So they're like, well, we're gonna make the character, we're gonna bring him in, but we can't do that. So what do? We give him again motivation. He has this tragic background, and you find out again like the reason why he couldn't save his wife is because basically the people who were funding his research were like, we can't do it anymore. Like it's not like you're not going far enough. We have to put the plug on this. And then his wife is left in cryostasis. Accidents ensue. He becomes Mr. Freeze and he goes after initially the people who wronged him. And then when that's not enough, he just keeps doing what he's doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And
So
same thing goes for
mhm,
Catwoman. Catwoman is trying to preserve this land for mountain lions that it's,
mhm,
that's off of, off of the city. Uh, for Poison Ivy, like Poison Ivy is trying to revive these endangered or actually
mhm,
extinct breed of roses, and so yeah, they're evil people, or at least
yep,
their motivations are more towards the the outside of the realm of good,
mhm,
but you at least can figure that out. It's like, okay,
yeah,
yes. And I want to I do want to say, when that mountain lion shows up at the end of the two-part Catwoman episode, and it just totally, you're just thinking, is mountain lions will kill the shit out of things.
definitely. They
And it's
murder lots of things.
like this mountain lion standing over Red Claw, and you're like, that mountain lion is going to kill that person.
Yes.
But either way, like I
Mhm,
remember as a kid and as an adult watching that episode, I'm like,
mhm,
I'm just laughing at this, and I shouldn't be, but it's just funny.
mhm.
It reminds me of like the end of Dodgeball when Chuck Norris just shows up and he gives him the thumb. That's what the mountain lion was like at the end of this. Just
he,
like,
he- No, thank you, mountain lion.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And then Red Claw's in jail later. Fucking mountain lion. Yeah.
He's bulbous now, and he's got a huge thing of KFC he's eating out of in prison somehow.
But I mean,
Mhm,
it is true. Like the larger point is that
mhm,
for the rogues gallery of Batman, right, and
mhm,
all of these different things that we honestly haven't even mentioned the
mhm.
Joker yet, and the iconic Mark Hamill,
Oh yeah.
you know,
Mhm,
that like these characters, they make sense,
mhm.
and so that's why I think it's easy for kids and for people that discover it later to kind of buy into this. Like it's, yeah,
Yeah, 100%, man. Like, you've got realistic villains, you've got great animation, you've got great storytelling going on, and there are really two more key pieces that make this a great show for what it was and still is. And one of them is the music.
yes.
The music
I
is
was
key
I
to
was
this. Mm-hmm.
Yes, I was waiting for this moment to shine. Like I wanted to wear a cape for it so I could flip the
Mm-hmm.
cape over and be like, "Yep, I'm ready. Let's talk about music." Yeah. Yes, dude, the
Mm-hmm.
music for this is what truly for me made this a cinematic experience because okay, so if memory serves, there
Mm-hmm.
was like 10 different composers that contributed to the animated series.
Mm-hmm.
And each one of them carries this iconic sound from the theme song all the way through to the end credits of every fucking episode.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's impressive, it's distinct,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a reason why they still use the animated series Batman theme recurring in other things
Yep.
even now.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's that good, and it truly gives a footing to everything in this series.
Oh,
I mean, I
absolutely.
truly believe it.
I mean, it's this mix of haunting and yet uplifting that just doesn't seem like it should be possible, but that's what they pull off every episode. And they also do a great job of how like the episodes aren't wall to wall music. Like the music
Yeah,
comes in at just the right moment. There are times where your only sound may be a tin can like being blown by the wind down a road because they
yeah,
want the sound to hook you into what's going on and bring you into the moment, and then the music creeps in and then just adds and escalates things. And while there were like overall 10 composers, the first one they brought in who really got the ball working on what this is was Shirley
Mr. Elf.
Walker.
Oh, well, Danny Elfman. Danny Elfman helped
Mm-hmm.
compose the theme.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
and
Well.
and Shirley Walker though
Mm-hmm.
was one of the like few female composers even working in Hollywood at
Mm-hmm.
that point in time, and so that was, I think, really, I'm not going to use like the brave thing here because
Mm-hmm.
bravery's not it. It's just she technically
It was
great
rare.
composer,
Mm-hmm.
very rare, and they put her at front and center.
Yeah, and I mean, she'd previously been working with like I think even learning under Danny Elfman, which is a part of
Yeah,
how this started. And on top of rare, like yes, like having a female composer as your lead composer for the show, incredibly rare. But also one actually having an orchestra for your show for a cartoon,
yes,
unheard of, absolutely unheard of. Like because originally like going for it, they were originally like, all right, well we'll use like synth sound bites, like because that's what everyone gets. But you know how he said that we're gonna make we're like the biggest thing that Warner Brothers is trying to do right now is just make Spielberg happy. Well,
yeah,
Spielberg sees what's going on with the show. He sees the animation. He's read some of the stories. And he's like, "What are you guys doing for music?" They're like, "Oh, we're gonna do some synth stuff." He's like, "No, no, you can't do that. You're gonna have an orchestra for your show. I'll make sure it happens." And Spielberg gets them like a full orchestra for every episode of the show, and like they were blown away by it. Like we had no idea this would be a thing we'd even get for this show, and Spielberg makes it happen. So you have this amazing sound for the show now, and now on the topic of sound, I think this brings us to the last part of this because this is going to be voice casting, and I think this is pivotal because to like some people they're like, oh hey, who's your favorite Batman? Is it Bale? Is it Kilmer? Is it Keaton? Is it Clooney? Is it West? And I'm like fucking Kevin Conroy.
It's Conroy.
Conroy's
It's
my fucking
always
Batman,
always
100%.
Conroy.
Just like Mark Hamill's my tie for the Joker with Heath Ledger. HL and Mark Hamill, those are my boys.
Oh, who? But how many times have you and I just like we've stopped everything we've been saying,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we'll just go, Alfred, where's the mayonnaise? You know, like you and I
Mm-hmm.
have done that plenty of times. We're just like,
Yeah.
how is it's so iconic just to hear him go, Alfred. Like
Yeah.
whether it's a video game, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's the TV show, like for me, Conroy made Batman iconic,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's because that balance of Bruce Wayne and Batman voice, he did it without it being ridiculous like a
Mm-hmm.
Christian Bale,
Yep.
And I don't care for Christian Bale's performance as the Batman voice.
Mm-hmm.
I still think it's passable and fine.
Oh yeah.
But Conroy was like one of the few people
Mm-hmm.
that balanced it, and I've never questioned it at
No,
all.
no. He has this perfect like Bruce Wayne is relaxed and lackadaisical, and Batman has this constant gravel to his voice. Is the best way I can think to explain it. It sounds like there are rocks like instead of saliva like churning back in the back of his palate. And he had this basically amazing idea for Batman. And by Batman, like looking at Conroy is not a voice actor by trade initially when he came on. He had done a couple voiceover things, like, and that was it. He didn't even have a voiceover agent. He had an acting agent. He was mostly a stage actor in New York. But his
Yeah.
agent gets this, hey, they're doing a Batman cartoon. I think you should try it. And he's like, really? I don't do voice work like that. He's like, no, 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 just try it. I know it's different, but go in there. So Conroy goes in and basically thinks like, well, I'm a character actor. I'm going to focus on the characters here. So what I have to do to bring this character to life, and importantly, keep it from getting stale, is I have to look at who Batman is. And Batman, in this case, and this is Conroy quoting, is Batman is not the disguise. Batman is who he became to after the tragedy that happened and he experienced as a child. Batman is where he's the most comfortable, and he used this idea to make this voice, to make this be like, and you can see that in what's going on here, because when you watch the show and you see Batman, and then they transition to something with Bruce Wayne, you get this feel that like Batman's trying to make himself sound nice to be Bruce Wayne,
It
and
totally is. It totally is.
it's
Yeah.
it's brilliant. And looking at even like him coming in that day, Andrea Romero, who's the voice director for the series, she has lots of experience from like one just directing, stage management, acting, and eventually an agent. She listened to over 500 auditions for the voice of
Yeah.
Batman.
Yes.
Didn't love any of them. She's like, I don't know what we're gonna do. We don't have a lead. And then one day Conroy steps in, and like I don't even know if they were like even looking for auditions that day. He just necessarily showed up and wanted to talk to the director about the role, and she admits like not thrilled that this guy walks in wanting to do this. And then she's like, what hooked me at it though is instead of just like wanting to audition right away, he asked questions about the character. He asked questions about the production and what was going on. And she's like, this is different. He clearly cares, at least on some level, hopefully as much about this as we do. We'll give him a shot. And then she's like, fell in love instantly, just
And
head over heels over this the depiction. And I mean, sadly, Conroy has only been able to portray Batman live action once, and it was in a CW
yeah,
series. And the way they chose to do it sucked. I mean,
I know.
Conroy
But
did great, but the
he
way
looked
they
great.
did it sucked.
He looked great.
He did.
Probably felt great too.
Oh yeah,
You know.
and
Yeah.
Conroy is someone who, like, he comes back as Batman so frequently. Like
Yeah.
he's there. The Arkham series, he's Batman for the voice of all of that except for Origins.
Yeah.
All the Justice League cartoons, a majority of even like their animated universe that they did for a while before they rebooted it. Conroy was popped in every once in a while for those too. Um,
If you truly want to see just how how think or how
mhm,
think, if you want to know how think, so do.
mhm.
Sorry. If you want to see a really strong presentation of Conroy as Batman, it's in the first episode where the Scarecrow appears,
Mhm,
and he's talking to, I think it's like the University of Gotham or whatever, when he's trying to figure out where these like certain sounds. Oh no, Man Bat. It was Man Bat.
mhm,
Sorry, where he's talking to these scientists on the phone, but he's in the suit as Batman, talking to them through the phone as
mhm.
Bruce Wayne.
Yes.
And like when you think of a character and like trying to keep their guys up and everything, you could easily slip up there,
Mhm.
right? But to see him kind of code switch, he knows he has to talk as Bruce Wayne, even though he's wearing the suit, which is a rare thing for him.
Yep.
That that was a really cool exchange to see it, because as soon as
Mhm.
he hangs the phone, he's like, he obviously doesn't say this, but he's like, God damn it, they're lying to me. Like it's like as soon as he hangs up, you're just like he's
Mhm.
back to Batman because he's in the suit.
Oh
And
yeah, like
I
snapping
thought that
like
was really
flipping on a
cool.
switch.
Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. Um,
And
God, yeah.
yeah. And
Mhm.
and and so for a lot of folks watching this show,
Mhm.
because now it's like commonplace as a nerd to go like, Mark Hamill is Joker,
Mhm.
right? Well, a lot of us didn't know that when we were
Mhm.
watching this for the first time,
No.
as kids. We had no
Mhm.
idea it was Luke Skywalker, under the purple suit,
Mhm.
like none of us knew that. And so one thing about the Joker that I always really appreciated with this, and it wasn't just the voice,
Mhm.
it was the fact that the Joker, while he is an urban terrorist and a horrible villain, not
Mhm.
in the sense that he's a bad villain, but like he's just horrible in the way that
Yeah.
he treats people.
Mhm.
uh, his portrayal as the Joker in some of the early episodes of this series, sometimes he's not even focused purely on the villainy.
Mm-mm.
Like he interacts with people almost how I do when it's like going into Home Depot and I don't want to be like talked to by one of the employees.
Mhm.
That's how the Joker interacts with a lot of people in this
Yeah.
in the show. He's
Mhm.
like he's just mildly annoyed by humanity uh overall.
Yeah.
And so to see him interact with people is funny because there's one point there's a little boy who is at a party that the Joker crashes, and
Mhm.
so he follows the Joker home, and you would think the Joker would just be like, I'll just kill the kid and
Yeah.
and put the body somewhere.
Mhm.
No, he's like mildly annoyed the child is there, and instead he's like he goes into babysitter mode. It is the
Mhm.
weirdest. It's the weirdest thing. It's like it's such a juxtaposed like way to see the Joker.
Yeah. Mhm.
But at the same time, it's development that literally no other Batman property will ever take time to
Mhm.
do,
No.
you
Uh,
know?
jumping on that bandwagon with like just the way they put the Joker together with this. Like one of my favorite Joker moments comes from the series spun off into two feature films. The first one, Mask of the Phantasm, and
Yes.
there's this older character who's afraid Batman's coming to kill him. Goes to the Joker looking for help, and he like, you gotta help me, Joker. And
Yeah.
he grabs the Joker, like the balls on this guy for grabbing the Joker by his suit and pulling him towards him, needs to help him. And you see the rage just build up in the Joker, and you like it's even shifting the color on the screen. He just goes,
Yeah.
"Don't touch me, old man. I don't know
Yeah.
where you've been." He's like, "Of course I'll help you. It's the Batman. I hate him." It just goes from like terrifying to funny in like nothing. And looking at that though, like one thing that Romero like commented on when Mark Hamill came in and she pitched him for doing this. One, Mark Hamill wasn't even the first voice for this. And
Yeah.
very another person who famously portrayed a clown that was terrifying was the original voice. Take a guess who it is? Famous scary clown.
Oh god. Oh, I'm embarrassed.
He also once in the movie about killer gorillas to the lost city of Zinj, he was the butler in Clue. Um,
Yeah, dude. I'm embarrassed because I know the name, but it's not there right now.
it's Tim Curry. Tim Curry
Yes.
was originally,
See,
yep, originally
I
cast Red Lines and everything.
see. Here's the issue. I like in
Hmm.
my mind, I'm seeing all the pictures of Tim Curry. Like I'm seeing him in Home Alone 2. I'm seeing him even as in older age after he had a stroke. Like I'm seeing all the photos of
Hmm.
Tim Curry in my head, and I'm like, fuck, I haven't heard his name in so long.
Yeah. And
Would you-
he recorded. He had episodes done, and then they pitched the like I think some executive saw like the reading or heard it, and he's like, I don't like it. Change it. I don't want him as the Joker. That's all that Ramirez ever said about it. She doesn't give us a why. We don't know if this man just personally had a thing against Tim Curry, or maybe he legit didn't like the character that Tim Curry was doing here, or maybe he felt again like, oh, they're just gonna see it and that's all it's gonna be. So, but anyway, Curry has to be recast. So she
yeah.
goes to a few people, doesn't like him, throws it out there to Mark Hamill, and she's like, it was like this guy had been practicing for this role his whole life, and we didn't even know it. That's how well he did this. He had this ability to get manic, terrifying, funny, and at times remorseful, all in this character they weren't expecting him to do. And one thing that Hamill definitely remembers from auditioning as the Joker, when he saw the script for the Joker that he was reading, on the very top in handwriting it said, "Do not do Jack Nicholson." And he was like,
Yeah.
honestly, that was a relief because like he's like, Jack Nicholson is Jack Nicholson. He did a great job in the movie, but like if I had to do him the whole series, like I don't know if I would have liked it as much because then I'm just trying to imitate what someone else did. But I got to do what I wanted to with the Joker and turn him into who I wanted to and make the character that I wanted here. And again, because of this series, we get this iconic Joker out of it. Where again, like a lot of people, like we're saying, Conroy's our Batman. There are so many people who say Hamill's their Joker. Like hands down, there's no one. Anything they've done hasn't come close to what Hamill did in this series.
Yeah, and I think it's so obviously on the TV show, he establishes an incredible voice,
Mm-hmm.
and he establishes really just how the Joker should represent a light switch,
Mm-hmm.
right? And how he can go from comedic to one second to deranged the next, and then have respect for Batman.
Yeah.
Like it's such an interesting change. And this doesn't apply to the animated series, but as you go through the Arkham series
Mm-hmm.
and getting to see how his voice changes because his mental state is degrading, his
Yep.
body is degrading,
Mm-hmm.
like that's that's what I think a true triumph is to Mark Hamill for
Mm-hmm.
this. But within the animated series, still, like there's no comparison.
Yeah.
I mean, he is the
Mm-hmm.
he's one of the best portrayals of the Joker that you'll ever see.
Absolutely. And looking at other characters in the show that are iconic, one the show made is Harley Quinn.
Yes, Arlene
She
Sorkin.
did not exist before this. And like Arlene Sorkin, she was actually one of the friends of the writer Mark Dini on the
Yeah,
show. And he was one originally just designing Harley after Arlene in the first place.
yeah,
He's like,
yeah.
I'm gonna make this like my friend. And then they went to like cast her, and they're like, well, who should we get? And Dini's like, why don't we get my friend? Why don't we get Arlene to do it? And Arlene has this what he described as a warped Billie Holiday voice that has also just
Man,
become directly associated with the
synonymous.
character. Like you
Yeah,
don't like. Grant, I haven't seen her new series where Kaylee Cuoco is voicing her on the HBO, but I
yeah,
imagine like most cases, you're getting someone who's trying to redo Arlene Sorkin's voice
yeah.
for the
Oh, totally.
character.
And
Mm-hmm.
and where they kind of fail too is, and I say fail, but I should say interpret differently
Mm-hmm.
because that's truly what it is. When you see Harley Quinn in like the Suicide Squad series,
Mm-hmm.
and even like post Sorkin, they lean so hard into the most exaggerated parts of her voice,
Yep.
whereas in the animated series, yeah, she has some of those like really weird, I don't know if you want to call it plucky ways of talking,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't apply to every single word,
No.
because to me, it's like it's an acknowledgement that her brain really has become different people, right? There's different people in her
Mm-hmm.
brain. There's who she was before she became this deranged, criminal,
Yeah.
and there's the pre-life, and so you kind of hear that in the voice. The voice doesn't truly represent just Harley. It
Mm-mm.
represents who she was before that point too.
Yeah.
And so after this, after this stage, you get people who just want to make the most comical parts of her voice
Mm-hmm.
in every single word, and it doesn't work.
I
It
know.
doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Not at all. And again, even then, Sorkin does a great job of showing the difference between Harleen Quinzel and Harley Quinn.
Yeah.
And that's, I think she does great. And again, like you said, like how she can like turn on certain parts of her voice to work. Like when she says like Mr. J, like
Yeah.
not every J is pronounced like she says like J for Joker, which again just
Yeah.
shows like the affinity she had for the Joker and this bizarre like mentality behind her where like she gets abused by Joker pretty hard throughout the series, but seems
Yeah.
to always for some reason come back to him in a way that she can't describe even herself. Because there's
Yeah.
even I think one episode where she decides she's gonna leave the Joker and she actually like
Yeah.
hangs out with Batman for most of the series. For most
Yeah.
of the episode, which is a great episode, by the way. There's so many good ones in here. But looking at how like this cast was so successful, one in huge part is Romero. And not only did she do the casting, but she would always have like as much as she could. She couldn't do it all the time, she admitted, because it's time constraints will happen. But she would, as much as possible, have the cast get together and read the episode together. So that way they could feed off of each other. They could really,
Yes.
most of these people again were character actors, so that they could actually before they'd go to record would have an idea of their voice interacting with other people and how what their characters were feeling at the time. So Romero could actually direct them not only in the moment of recording but before that as an episode of as a whole. And then when you
Yeah.
look at the actual cast of this, you have some recurring like characters that are in most episodes, of course, like Batman, Alfred, and like Commissioner Gordon are basically in every episode,
Yeah.
with the exception of Gordon, probably isn't in every episode.
Gordon
Mm-hmm.
Gordon definitely shows up quite a bit,
Mm-hmm.
but I mean, for me, Gordon, and even to an extent, uh, some of the supporting characters that
Mm-hmm.
appear there, they're not. I don't want to call it a negative thing,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't always think of, Alfred as a standout. I don't always
Mm-hmm.
think of Commissioner Gordon as a standout.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the other like police figures that are there that always show up that are meant to be kind of plucky and comedy
Mm-hmm.
relief, don't always really think of them when I think of this series.
No. Mm-hmm.
They're just a very small part of it, and I hate to say that for Alfred, because Alfred is now, getting his own stories and
Mm-hmm.
his own backstory, and like,
Yeah.
oh, technically
Mm-hmm.
he's a soldier in a garden versus a gardener in war
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing, and so it's
Yep.
like, yeah, okay, I get that,
That's okay,
but
but I mean, even this
yeah,
Alfred Pennyworth was great for the fact that he would actually stand up to Bruce and Batman every once in a while.
he
If
would,
Batman would make like a questionable decision, Alfred would question it and like throw it out there for him. Because
yeah,
like we look at Alfred Pennyworth at least in the films, and I'm the actor from that is like escaping me. He's my Tim Curry in the moment. Um, but like he just did whatever Batman asked him to do, unquestionably. Like, yep, no problem. The biggest standout that I could remember him doing is the fact that when Michael Keaton spit out his soup, it said it was cold, and Alfred said it was fishy swa, sir. And then Alfred's like, Bruce is like, well, so what? So what the fuck? It's still cold. He's like, well, it's supposed to be cold. Oh, okay, I like it now. That's the most I saw that Alfred really stand out to Bruce in those.
yeah,
Whereas this
yeah.
one does, but even then, like I'm like his voice is escaping me. But let's look at like some of the overall like names that have come into the show. Tara Strong, who again an animated staple, was Barbara Gordon on the series, so she was there pretty regularly. Paul
Hmm.
Williams, if you're not familiar with him, is he's a musician. He is known for writing and singing the song "We've Only Just Begun" and "Just an Old-Fashioned Love Song." Was the Penguin in the show? Ron Perlman, you
Of
have to know
course,
this name if you've listened to our show before, was Clayface in the animated
yes,
series. Frank Welker, who's been in many a cartoon, had the iconic role of Isis, who is Catwoman's cat,
yeah, yeah,
who was here. John DeLance, who is Q, had an episode. Heather Locklear was in the show. Ernie Hudson, Adam West had a cameo on here, and
yep.
LeVar Burton, Maurice LaManche, who we've talked about.
The
Like
late Ed Asner as well.
there,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, Ed Asner, who is, the main character in Up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, these are voices that are preserved, fortunately, in this
Mm-hmm.
series, because it is sad that some of these folks are passing on now.
Yeah.
It's been that long.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, yeah,
Yep. Now, so we like those are like this is everything that makes this show great. Like the way they can collaborate, the animation, the storytelling, the voice, the dedication to get the show right by its executive producer. Because Bruce Timm, I think, has said several times, like this show wouldn't have happened without Jean MacCurdy. If it wasn't for what she did and the passion she had for this show would have fell apart. But
I don't want to interrupt
mhm,
you, but I do want to mention one thing before we get too far away from the voice actors.
mhm.
We technically got more than one Star Trek alum because
Oh
Kate
yeah.
Mulgrew was also Red Claw.
Oh no shit! I forgot about Kate Mulgrew being in
Yeah,
here.
yeah, Kate Mulgrew was on this. Yeah,
Mhm.
I and the way that HBO has the episode set up,
Mhm.
her arc is like the very first thing you see. So yeah,
Ah, okay.
right away I was like, oh yeah, look at Janeway. Yeah, all right,
Well,
yeah, but
well,
no, you're yeah, yeah.
well,
Go
I
ahead.
would say actually LeVar Burton was in there too. I don't know if you missed that, but
No, no, I did. I said
okay, good.
there's multiple
Oh
Star
yeah.
Trek alum in there. Yeah,
Very
yeah.
good. Yeah. So, but anyway, I think kind of bringing things to a close here. Two things. One, standout episodes. I know we've talked about Heart of Ice, we've talked about Red Claw, um, but do you have any other episode that you think of when you think of this series that this is like? I mean, the series itself is iconic, but this episode is also it really aids to that iconicness of the series. Do you have anything that stands out to you?
For me, when I think of the iconography of this series, the one that I usually come back to the most is Clayface to Face,
Mm-hmm.
because the whole Clayface arc, it for me it sums up a lot of what's good about the animated series, in that Batman is not just fighting crime. Like sometimes he's fighting these things that aren't traditional criminals or not
Mm-hmm.
traditional villains. And I talked about Man-Bat earlier. You know, Clayface is one of these truly terrifying villains that Batman
Yeah.
fights. And as a child, I was kind of freaked out by it. Like the idea that you could be fighting something and like physically looking like you're beating it, but then all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden it just molds back together and keeps fighting you. To me, I saw that episode a lot growing up because obviously I didn't own the videos or anything.
Mm-hmm.
So seeing Clayface was terrifying, and I thought his episodes were awesome to see. And I'm not going into any of the Joker stuff on
Mm-hmm.
purpose because I think people will find that
Oh
anyway.
yeah.
But the Clayface stuff, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
just just messed with me as
And
a kid.
I mean, especially like that first episode of Henry, he almost kills Batman, but like all he does is he picks him up and he shoves him inside of himself to try and
Yeah,
suffocate him. And the way
yeah,
Batman gets out is he shoots the grapple gun out through him, and then he runs away after. He's like, "Fuck that! I can't punch this guy out. The
yeah,
gas bombs aren't doing anything. I got to find some other way to beat him." And like he barely gets out of there. It was terrifying and creepy.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, dude. That's like the animated series in a nutshell for me, is that this Batman is not invincible.
Mm-mm.
You know, this Batman is going to face not just the most militant of the Batman rogues gallery. Like he's going to be fighting some weird things, and you're going to see
Yeah.
a lot of variety in the show that you'll
Mm-hmm.
never see in the cinematic universe.
Mm-mm.
So,
Nope.
yeah, that's my big takeaway.
Nice. I think mine is definitely almost got him, and it's an episode that focuses on the rogues gallery of villains. And basically, it opens with all the villains being together playing a poker game, like in a warehouse somewhere. And
Yeah,
they're all sharing their stories about how they almost got Batman this one time. And
yeah.
so they go around the table. You've got Joker, Two Face, Riddler.
Killer
Those are the,
Croc,
Killer Croc
Poison
is there,
Ivy.
Poison
Yeah.
Ivy, and like you see more in the background who just don't have a speaking role in it because like they probably just wanted them there, but like
The
they
Mad
didn't get the
Hatter.
actors there. Mad Hatter was
Yeah.
there,
Well, the
and
Joker mentions the Mad Hatter is like you see the Mad Hatter in the series, but like the Joker as they're playing cards, he mentions the Mad Hatter as
mm-hmm,
like getting beaten by Batman recently, almost like you go to if you remember these like Longaberger basket parties
mm-hmm,
that people used to do in the 90s, like you're just talking about the local gossip of your neighborhood.
yep,
That's what this felt like to me.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry.
Absolutely, and no, and like everything to the point where like you see like again like I think this is one of the first times you really see what the villains even think about each other because like I mean the comics like Two Face and Joker fucking hate each other like they cannot stand each other at all. Penguin's got his own little thing going on where he can work with anyone, but he's always trying to find ways for him to come out on top, and you really see that in this episode over like Joker obviously like belittles Two Face over like I couldn't believe you thought a giant coin was going to work again.
Yeah,
All these
yeah,
things you get to Killer Croc and like all the other characters have like basically like when they start talking about it, it does like a flashback sequence and you see what they're talking about as it happens. But Killer Croc is like, there was this one time where I knocked him down to the ground. I picked up a rock and I was gonna smash him in the head, but I missed. And then they just stare at him like he's a fucking idiot. And then they start to quickly move on. And it pans back to Croc, and he's like, "Well, it was a really big rock."
Yeah. That's what's really funny about this is that
Mm-hmm.
you get to see what these villains think about each other too, not just
Mm-hmm.
about what they think of Batman,
Yeah.
but then they kind of share their theories too of who they
Mm-hmm.
think Batman is, and so it's a really weird way to humanize people that don't behave human,
Yes.
and it's great. It's really great.
Mm-hmm.
Like from the title card, dude. The title card shows the poker table, like you mentioned, set
Mm-hmm.
against like light, so you just see it's also iconic for the series.
Yes.
Um, but yeah, it's hilarious. It's like the idea of the dogs playing poker, but they're replaced with Batman
Yeah.
villains. It's great.
Fantastic. So I guess I think where we can leave this one then is like we've done with a lot of things we've talked about in the past. They're no longer airing because we talk about things that happened when we were younger. Um, and the only thing I think still going since we were kids is probably The Simpsons because that's eternal.
Yeah,
Yeah. But
yeah,
we like to talk about a show's like lasting legacy or its impact that it has. So in your mind, Mark, what do you think is the show's legacy?
yeah. What I think is the show's legacy is that it created a roadmap for what Batman could do to be respected in a serious tone. And it's not just that it started here and ended here, like you'd mentioned. It went on to influence other series, and it was also one of the few properties that got a sequel series.
Yeah.
With an older Bruce Wayne
Mm-hmm.
training the next Batman, just like Extreme Ghostbusters, right?
Yeah.
So to me, this was trailblazing. This was the roadmap for how to make like Batman not just socially relevant again,
Mm-hmm.
but how to market him to a more widespread audience and not just lovers of comic books, not just people who knew Batman. Like this is where Batman truly began to spread out and dig wider for a moment,
Mm-hmm.
like it. So for me, that's where it began. That's where it began for, I shouldn't even say just me. This is where Batman began for a lot of people. So that's where I really think that this will kind of live. I think people will go back and find it and appreciate it again because they've never seen it and they just weren't
Mm-hmm.
aware of it. But I do consider this moment, and I know people will probably go, no, 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 Keaton did this and the movies did this. And I'm like, I'll give you some credit there.
Mm-hmm.
But for a lot of people who needed an introduction, maybe they couldn't afford to go to the movies.
Yeah.
Like this was it. This was it for
Mm-hmm.
me because I didn't actually see the movies until years later, dude.
Yep.
So this was it for me. This was my entry beyond comics into Batman.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, 100%, man. I'm just going to mirror a lot of what you said too. Like this show, one, its impact on the character is long lasting. I think everyone who does a voice for Batman and isn't trying to in some way like do what Conroy did is doing a disservice to the character. Obviously, like they all kind of take their own thing and do their own thing with it, but the best Batman voices usually try and do a Conroy impression to some default to some degree, not default. Um, what it's done for the character, like you said, like this was the gateway for a lot of people to liking Batman. I mean, you had like kids who weren't reading the comic books, they didn't see the movies yet. This was their first entry to Batman, and this is what got them into reading the comics. This is what made them go watch the movies afterwards because they
Yeah.
saw how great the show was. And then, like again, like this is now Batman going forward. Like I think if there's a singular point that really says this is where this is where we take like this is where the character like changed and this is now how we go in like that direction, that's here because even at some point like the Batman movies got goofy and had to go away for a while, the series never did that. Like Batman the Animated Series was strong from when it started on like Fox and to until it went to the WB and it got a bit of a facelift. And
Yeah.
then even then like the story was still great even though maybe the viewership wasn't there anymore. And then it continued on like even like Superman the animated series, it started out like with a really goofy Lex Luthor, but they're like we can't fucking do this anymore. Like this we have to make Lex Luthor more serious and make him intimidating. And you see that start happening more. after you have a Batman Superman crossover movie. You get this much more serious Lex Luthor after that. And you get more serious Superman stories after that. The Justice League animated series, very adult conversations in that show. Wouldn't have been that without the show. And like everything that's modern Batman is going to lead back to this cartoon. And I think
Yeah.
that's what this show's legacy is it was a turning point for the character.
Totally. Absolutely. And for those of you who have made it this far, we've been doing this a lot more lately because we, of course, want to thank you for listening to this show. And if you got here by accident, we always love to recommend reaching out. Definitely, like, comment, subscribe, and do all those things. But also feel free to email us at digitaldissectionpodcast@gmail.com. And your support goes an incredibly long way. And with some of the growth we've seen, whether it's through the standard podcast platforms or YouTube, we've seen a lot more of you listening to us. So seriously, thank you so much. If you have any ideas for future shows, anything you'd like to discuss, just let us know. We'd love to hear from you. So we appreciate your time.
And until next time, keep on dissecting.